Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.co.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources, all backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio. Good morning, mate. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Mick. It's good to be back with you. Well, for the listeners, Mick and I are actually doing this episode for the second time, which we're delighted about because it's a really interesting topic. But technical glitches are not something that are all that fun. We had recorded this episode, and it unfortunately it had to be sacrificed because we had some problems with it. So hopefully, second time round, the better we do it. What do you think?
Well, now that you've come clean on that we're doing it again, I'll actually say happy Wednesday to you, mate. This is actually a Wednesday recording, not a usual Monday recording. Mate, I am. I'm, it's always nice to go through things twice and, like we hold ourselves to high standards and we weren't happy with the first product. So it's, it's one of those things that occasionally we have to deal with every now and again, but I'm glad we got the time to do it again and to learn a little bit more because there's always things like you watch a movie for the first time, there's always little bits of gold that you might miss the first time. So I'm looking forward to hearing Shona's expertise the second time around.
Well, it is some really good stuff. We do have Shona Halson, who's the guest on this episode. I'll introduce Shona properly in a minute, but the title of this episode is Sleep Under Pressure, Travel, Hormones and Recovery. And we have done previous episodes on sleep, which you led, Mick, which was a really good one. And actually the first episode of Exercise Matters ever was on recovery. But we've never really kind of discussed it more than just those two things in isolation. We haven't discussed travel. And the other thing that we speak to Shona about quite a bit is female-specific issues. First half of this episode is really about travel and how to travel well as an athlete. And then the second bit is really about kind of integrating that in with, particularly with female-specific concerns in playing sport and being on the road as well. So, yeah, it should be a good one.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it is. It's a nice meeting of the worlds because they just go hand in hand. Let's dive in.
Yeah, great. So Shona Halson is our guest on today's episode. She's the Deputy Director of the Sprint Research Centre at ACU in Canberra and specialises in sleep, recovery, fatigue and travel in elite sport. Shona's former head of recovery as a physiologist at the Australian Institute of Sport. She was there for 16 years and has supported multiple Olympic campaigns. And Shona's also the author of over 160 peer-reviewed papers and globally recognised leader in applied performance in science. So there's two papers that Shona actually sent me through ahead of our conversation because what I've started to do a little bit with our conversations, Mick, is with the guests that are coming on is rather than just saying, hey, we've got this topic that we think is interesting, I also say, this is the topic we want to discuss and what's new from you. And so with Shona, she actually sent me a couple of papers that she was author and co-author on from last year. I'm not going to go into the detail because I'll leave that for others. If you want to read the paper top to bottom, you're very welcome to. Both, I think, are available as a free download online. But the first one is by Shona and colleagues, and the title of it is Uncovering Sleep Behaviour in Women's Football. What evidence do we have? That's published in Sports Medicine last year. And the second paper is by an author by the name of Madison Pearson and colleagues. And the title of this one is Menstrual Cycle Symptoms, but not estrogen or progesterone concentrations are associated with sleep in female athletes. This is published in the European Journal of Sport and Science also last year. So two really interesting contemporary papers that are actually putting new concepts and new things out there, particularly for the girls. So I think I think that will frame that up really well. Are you looking forward to this, Mick?
Yeah, yeah, I am. I think there's, like when it comes to travel, like I just remember like hearing some wild stories, and that's what I was getting at before, like, especially for the athlete, and it's elite athlete, it's recreational athletes. We've got so many people that kind of train hard and play hard down here in Australia. They might have to cross time zones to go from, even Sydney to Perth, to play footy, to do tries, to participate in high rocks, to do CrossFit games. Like there's going to be just a mixed bag of participants, both males and females, both young and old, that not only just fly, coast to coast here in Australia, but also to even, if they got to go across to New Zealand, they got to go up to Japan or into Indonesia or travel. So look, there's just such an array of athlete that it's just not all about the elite athlete. It's all about, these even amateur athletes too. And I'm just being biased here to Australia. You go over to the US and go to Canada, like they're crossing many, many time zones as well to go east to west or west to east. So yeah, I am looking forward to it because I know there's going to be a lot covered here, because I think it's a very complicated topic, and to get that rest right so that when you land in the destination that you're participating in and hit the ground running and not be struggling with travel lag, jet lag, and that fatigue that comes from that, I think it's going to be a really interesting chat and discussion. So yeah, can't wait.
One of the things that I took out of it also was just me as a traveller for business, and clearly I'm not going overseas to compete in anything substantial athletically, but I did actually find that a lot of these things that have been discussed relate well to life as well as for sport. So if you're thinking I'm not an elite athlete, I don't travel, and I'm not going interstate or international to go and compete in my sport, that's fine. Stick around because I think you'll get something interesting out of this. Now, the first thing I asked Shona was her pre-travel checklist. Like, what does she instruct or suggest to her athletes to do before getting on the flight, and then also actually what to do on the flight? And this is what she's got to say.
Yeah, so what we tend to do is to break up international travel in particular, or where there's a number of time zones crossed, so more than about 3 time zones. We tend to break it up into pre-travel, during the flight, and post-travel. So pre-travel is, there's not a whole lot you can do except trying to make sure you get on the flight. Again, especially international travel, you don't want to get on a flight fatigued already, because it's very rare that people sleep very well on a flight. So if you're tired before you get on the flight, you're probably going to be very tired when you get off the flight. Some people talk about pre-adjusting to the time zone, so doing some pre-strategies around when you sleep to try to minimise that jet lag, but that's really difficult to do from a practical perspective. So before you go, general things to do is just try to get on the flight having already had some good sleep. And the other potential thing that you can do is just to look at the timing of the flights. So ideally, you don't want to land really early in the morning or really late at night. So if you can sort of land that kind of early afternoon, that usually gives people time to get to the hotel, have something to eat, and then go to bed. So that's usually a reasonable way of doing it. On the flight, generally the approach that I take is to try to minimise any illness. So, to keep trying to, use hand sanitizer all the time. Planes can be a little bit ridden with bacteria, so using hand sanitizer and washing your hands all the time is a good thing. Being mobile and walking around when you can. So if you're not sleeping, making sure you're walking around, you're hydrating. There's a little bit of debate as to whether you sleep on the destinations time zone or whether you just sleep when you can.
So there's some really nice tips in there. Shona did go on to discuss what to do when you land, but again, this is not our episode, is it, Mick? Like we had a few technical difficulties there, so I did listen in. I actually took some notes, so I will convey those in a minute. But a lot of those tips are they sound very easy and common sense, but I know very much from trial and error by just traveling for business that they work. Particularly making sure that I think one of the best things to do is just getting civilized flight times. If you're just traveling through the back end of the night and, you get to the airport and you're tired and you hardly get any sleep on the plane and you rock up the next day and it's 5 a.m. in the morning, it's a really tough 48 hours. So yeah, some good tips in there for sure.
Yeah, agree. There's it is like it's the simple stuff like make sure you're rested. Like how many times I've been guilty of this many times in the past. You sort of have an early morning flight. I often really stress about the sleep and sleeping through my alarm. So it's easier said than done for some people. But I always I always find myself having a terrible sleep the night before a flight. Just worry, especially if it's a 6 a.m. flight or a 7 a.m. flight. If I've got to fly to Melbourne or for work or whatever, or get away for a course or whatever. But yeah, I'm getting better at it. But I know there's a lot of people out there who probably go through the same hassle, especially if you've got an early morning flight that you don't want to miss. It can be quite stressful and you find yourself waking up every couple of hours. But I do like a strategy there, particularly trying to find times to fly out that and land quite helpful to get you into the groove. But yeah, good tips.
Yeah, good. So Shona did go on to say what to do when you get there for an athlete. So I'll convey some of these points, and they're good points. The first is switch to local time immediately. Eat, sleep, and train on the destination clock. Don't think that you kind of need to stay in the time zone that you were. Don't try and be hybrid and just slowly adapt. Just go cold turkey and just get into the new time zone. The sunlight, I should say, is your strongest tool. Morning and afternoon light, particularly, is something that's really helpful, and it can be a challenge actually, because I know that like when I've travelled at times, you can be a bit travel fatigued. You get there, you say, "Oh, I'm in my hotel room," and you want to close the curtains and have a nap. But if you can go and experience the daylight, the circadian rhythm will kick in a lot better. I found that to be really useful. If you do need a nap, make sure it's just a short controlled nap. Just try like a short one for maybe 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. Try not to get into a deep sleep, but little naps to try and get you through to a proper bed night and a full night's rest. That first night is something that Shona really kind of stressed. And the last thing is that it is stressful to travel. So don't let one bad night really get you down in the dumps about that. My travel routine's not good. I'm not feeling great. I can't train well. One bad night is something people have all the time. And when you travel, you should almost expect it.
Yeah, nice. I like it. Simple, practical, easy to do for most of us. And like we said in one of the first, the first podcast that I talked about, sleep is such a critical component to your performance, whether or not it is an athletic performance or a sporting performance or a business performance. That's what I liked about what you said before. Like this isn't just about elite athletes. Like, if you got to go over and deliver a really strong meeting, or you got to go and, apply for a job and you want to perform mentally and physically, how you sleep and how you turn up to that kind of business interaction or that meeting is going to be really critical to your performance and maybe your job or what success in whatever it is that you're trying to do. So yeah, make sure you get that sleep and prioritise that sleep. I think it's really key.
We need to distinguish between two terms, and the first one is travel fatigue and the second is jet lag. So they are different, and I do ask Shona how to distinguish the difference objectively. But let's quickly just define both. So travel fatigue is just the general physical and mental tiredness from the travel process. So it's just being in like a plane for a long time or in buses or cars for a long time. It can include dehydration, disrupted routine, and not necessarily about crossing time zones. But jet lag is different. Jet lag is where your circadian rhythm is misaligned by crossing multiple time zones, and your internal body clock is out of sync with your new local time, affecting your sleeping, your alertness, your mood, and also your performance. So I asked Shona, how do you distinguish between the two? And this is what she's got to say.
Yeah, that's such a good question because they have so many similar symptoms, and so it can be a little tricky to discern from a measurement perspective. I think the key thing to remember is that travel fatigue will obviously occur without a change in the time zone. So you can just get a classic example is Australia flying up to Japan. Might be a 9 or 10 hour flight, usually 1, maybe 2 or no time zone changes. And so generally the fatigue that's experienced from that is just from being on the flight. Now, obviously, if you're traveling across, so you might be traveling 10 hours still, but traveling across time zones, that can be very different. So the thing to look for to differentiate between the two is to look at timing of things, because jet lag is all about desynchronization of your body clock to the destination. So you want to look at things like like what time you're sleeping, your daytime fatigue. You normally have a lot more daytime fatigue and a lot more desynchronization in your sleep with jet lag in comparison to travel fatigue. So you might still feel a little bit tired with the travel fatigue, but you'll feel it at different times when you have the jet lag. So just simple questions about sleepiness and bed and wake times can give you a little bit of an idea about whether you've got jet lag on travel fatigue on its own, or travel fatigue and jet lag, because travel fatigue and jet lag usually go together.
Yeah, I've felt that and noticed that myself. I know that just that feeling of being, it almost, you feel crook. You actually feel like a little bit sick in the middle of the day when it's the jet lag, whereas just tiredness just feels like tiredness. You've had a big, long, hard day, and usually like a good night's sleep or two will sort that out pretty quickly. Jet lag tends to linger just that little bit longer.
Yeah. The amount of times I've flown across a couple of time zones and found myself at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and staring at the ceiling. It's that, classic behaviour. One of my best experiences at honeymoon a couple of years ago in New York. We are the city that never sleeps. It's one of the best things about jet lag is, we sort of travelled a bunch to get to New York. First couple of nights, we were waking up consistently at 2 o'clock in the morning after, crashing and burning about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. The city's a beautiful place to get. New York is a beautiful place to wander around when 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes, the shops aren't open, but it's a good way to sort of see the city without millions of people wandering around. But, the levels of safety that we were feeling as well, it's like, this is really cool. Like, you get to see it without all that traffic, but there's enough of a buzz around the city was really cool. A couple of days later, we're all back into sync again. But there's pros and cons to a bit of jet lag. Not when you probably want to go over there and give an A-grade performance in work or sport, but if you're over there on holiday and you've got a couple of days to kill it, isn't always the worst thing.
Yeah, well, I also travel to Perth a little bit because that's where my wife is from. So coming from the east coast of Australia over to the west coast of Australia, generally I'm a morning person. So I like to kind of get up early and do it. And then you go across over there and it's like happy days because I'm 3 hours ahead of everyone else. And you just get to, rather than being 8 o'clock at night, you get to 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you're cooked. Anyway. Now, in the one of the papers that I mentioned at the start, that was the Madison Pierce paper, and in that paper they discuss objective sleep scores. Now, you and I have discussed this a little bit about wearables and sleep and how to monitor it, and they've used the Oura Ring. And one of the things that was interesting in that paper was the difference between objective sleep scores, i.e. like what your ring's telling you or your watch is telling you, versus what your subjective sleep scores are. It's basically just how you feel there as well. And that has bearing on how like someone should train that following day or when they arrive. And what data do you actually listen to the most? Do you just go off the objective data? Do you listen to what the athlete has to say? So I put that question to Shona, and her response is fairly interesting.
Yeah, that's another really good question, and it's kind of tricky to answer because we know that like subjective experience really matters. So, if someone's saying that they haven't slept very well, that's an important thing to consider. Now, the objective data might say they've slept well, but if they still feel like they haven't, then that is important. I do think it's also important to decide and understand when they're reporting the poor subjective sleep, because sometimes you might wake up and feel not great, but within an hour you're feeling pretty good. And if that's the case, I wouldn't be super concerned about the subjective responses. But if it's, you're getting to training at like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and you've been awake for an hour or so and you're still feeling like you've had a really bad night's sleep, and that's corresponding to some daytime fatigue, because you can feel like you've had bad sleep but still actually do okay. So if you feel like you've had the bad sleep and it's persisting and it's affecting your daytime function, then that's when decisions might be made around training. I don't have the sort of blanket rules about just saying, no training or decreased training. I think a lot of people might feel bad, but once they get going, they're actually okay. And I think sleep's probably one of those things that you put in the toolbox with a whole lot of other factors that would contribute to making decisions. And I think, again, we need to sort of realise that you can have 1 or 2 or even 3 nights of not great sleep and still be okay. And so to put this pressure on people that if you have one bad night and you feel bad, we're going to have to change everything you do. I don't think that's that's a wise kind of message. I think we need to look at a little bit longer sleep disruption before we start to make sort of fundamental changes to what people are doing.
It blends in with my experience when I've travelled long distances with sports teams and athletes as well. Is that you do need to listen to them. You do need to really pay quite you need to pay attention to what they're telling you subjectively, because it's very easy just to kind of go off the data. Overlaying that, though, also is that my experience is that most of the performance coaches will never have super stressful training sessions or within, 24, 48 hours of kind of landing anyway. It's usually like a light movement activity. It's part of, like we were speaking about before, getting bright light, getting used to the time zone, moving your body, usually after being inactive for quite a long time. So I think Shona's comments are spot on and clearly like blend in with what the performance sport end of the market's kind of doing when they travel.
Yeah, great. I like how she's got this really calming sort of approach to it. Don't panic if you have a couple of nights sleep, and even like three rough nights sleep. Don't make wholesale changes. Like if we just have one crappy night's sleep and we're starting to jump at shadows because we're just so fixated on the data. Like I think there's the subjective responses I think is really, really key, and sometimes we overlook it if we're kind of really big data nerds and we just only look at the numbers. Like we've got to weigh into the subjective feelings of ourselves, but also of our athletes, depending on who you're talking to. But many times, how many times have you sort of turned up to the gym? Like I can just even recall last week, I felt like I had a pretty rubbish sleep. I was sort of 50-50 on getting out of bed, putting my shoes on, going to the gym. It was probably the first time I felt that in a few weeks. And I was like, what? I was going to go and see how it goes. By the end of the session, I was awesome. Like I felt good. Like, crap night's sleep, but felt good on the back of that exercise and didn't affect my session once I got started, once I got through my warm up and got started. And how many times would you experience that personally, but also too, your athletes would go through that sort of same process too. But if they're stacking up day after day, week after week, then we've got to start probably trying to tease into why is this happening, what's changed within the athlete or what's changed within yourself, and then make some changes, but certainly don't jump at shadows for those one or two crappy nights sleeps once you arrive at your destination.
Yeah, and remember that athletes like to move. So the thing, if they'll be caged animals if they've been on a flight for the best part of a day, and then you say, listen, we're not going to do a lot of activity day because you're still feeling a little bit tired. I agree with you totally. 9 times out of 10, you get people moving, you do a light training session, they feel so much better for it. And I feel like you just got a much better chance of getting a really good night's sleep in the new time zone that night.
Yeah, that's it.
So we were talking about objective sleep measures, and you and I are nerds. We've admitted this before, Mick, and particularly I like to nerd out kind of like on the tech. So I was very interested into what Shona and the research teams have been using, whether it has been watches, whether it has been Oura rings, whether it's been Whoop. So I'll put that question to her.
Yeah, so the wearables data is actually quite good and getting better. So when you look at things like, and I'll sort of keep it to Oura and Whoop, they're kind of the two most common, most popular devices that people use. And they measure bedtime, wake time, and percentage of sleep really well. So they measure that the same as like the research grade activity monitors that we've got and that we've used for a long time. Where they aren't quite as good is the deep sleep and the light sleep in comparison, and REM sleep, so your architecture. They're not quite as good as like the gold standard when you're in a lab, but they're still not bad. And so I think, I'm comfortable. We use Oura from a research perspective because I think they're, a lot of athletes and people quite like wearing the Oura ring, and they have some really good sleep metrics. But I personally think, and Oura and Whoop are very similar. It really just comes down to whether you want to wear a device on your wrist or on your finger. So some people like to wear it on their finger because they wear another watch, and then some people won't like to wear a ring because they might be doing some sort of gripping exercises or something in the gym. So I'm comfortable with Oura or Whoop. We use Oura now for research. We publish data with it because it's good enough now from a research perspective. It's just understanding what metrics to pay attention to and what not to.
Yeah, I've noticed that Aura's really kind of Yeah, it just seems to be going from strength to strength at the moment. There just seems to be a lot more people using it, particularly for the recovery side of things, including sleep and how they've fared after sport. And sometimes people are interchanging between the wristwatches and then the Aura rings, etc. Between that. What's your experience, Mick?
I've just got I like to keep a track of it. I've just got a Samsung smartwatch. I find it's pretty good. The Samsung Health tracker, currently not being paid or advertised, but happily would be accept payments or any kind of product placements by Samsung or Google or Apple just to sort of spruik their products, but currently not getting paid to say their names. But that's the only tech that I've got is a Samsung watch. Now that I've heard, Aura rings are good. I might have to put that on my good husband wish list. I've racked up a few good husband points over the last couple of weeks, and Mrs. Hughes laid up with a broken foot. Yeah, so
okay.
Might be coming my way for a upcoming birthday or Father's Day or something like that. Who knows? We'll see. I'll put it on my wish list.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I am one of those, I think I'm a rare individual where I actually get anxious about having my sleep measured. I just think that surely when you shut your eyes is the only time you don't get assessed. So
Well, that was actually fascinating to hear from Shona because, I've never had a sleep study done, but I've heard and had some patients, talk about them having to go off and get sleep studies done for their sleep apnea or other kind of sleep disturbances. And it sounds awful. Like you're in this kind of, really sterile environment. You got all these kind of things attached to you. Like surely that's not going to allow you to get into some good sleep quality. And so I like how they've compared the Aura rings and the Whoops to that, gold standard, and it's actually coming out, very, very close and reliable. So I think if they're starting to adopt this tech and use it routinely in their own studies, I think it speaks a lot about the quality and the data that they're getting and the accuracy of that data. So there was definitely a lot of question marks about the accuracy of a lot of their sports tech early on, but as time has sort of gone on, it's obviously caught up with current best practice and gold standards as they currently sit. So who knows what becomes gold standard in the future, but I think that all that gold standard stuff is being challenged because all that gold standard stuff, we look at quad strength and, all those other kind of objective measures that we use in other research that's probably been done, decades ago. And now with the rise of technology, I think the standards of what's considered gold standard slowly sort of changing over time.
Yeah, and also the tech's just going to continually get better, isn't it? So what we're talking about here in early 2025 is going to be very different in 18 months. So, yeah, stay tuned. 20, what did I say?
Yeah, 2025. Jeez, man, you're a year behind us. Catch up.
My kids keep telling me I'm living in the past. They're right. All right. Now let's change gears a little bit. We're going to start to get on to more female specific issues. And one of the things that was in Madison Pierce's study was looking into sleep changes across the menstrual cycle, because there's been a lot of debate about whether sleep and performance meaningfully fluctuate over the menstrual cycle, but there's been limited data until this point. So her study looked into this. So I asked Shona whether symptoms relate to sleep more than hormone concentrations, and if they are related to hormone concentrations, what should athletes do about that?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of projects. That one's published. We've got some more data that we've collected. The PhD students have collected. They've done a great job in this space because obviously these types of studies where you track females across multiple menstrual cycles and you're measuring blood samples and for hormones and you're measuring sleep and you're measuring performance, these are really hard studies to do. They're expensive, they're hard. The students don't have weekends because you have to tailor these kinds of studies to the female and their cycle. So, and I understand why this research hasn't been done, but we've started to try and understand this question is, does sleep change across the menstrual cycle? And so what we've sort of seen with the couple of studies that we've done now is that sleep doesn't seem to change too much across the cycle. So it doesn't seem to be related to these big fluctuations in hormones that we have across the cycle. So we have fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone across a menstrual cycle in a naturally cycling female, but we don't seem to see big changes in sleep. We also don't seem to see big changes in performance also. But what we do tend to see with sleep is an association between menstrual cycle symptoms and sleep. So if we are working with a female, an athlete or an individual who has quite high symptoms, and so they've got a lot of symptoms and they're severe, then we might start to see that they've got some sleep disturbances, which of course makes sense. We know that about pain and sleep. So it's not surprising that menstrual cycle symptoms might be associated with sleep. And so I guess from a practical perspective, what that means is really addressing those symptoms and working with the female around trying to manage those symptoms and working with a medical team, because you can monitor symptoms. I think that's a great thing to do, and start to understand where they occur and what exactly the symptoms are. And then you can go to a specialist, or you can go to someone and say, look, these are my symptoms. It's getting in the way of either my sleep or maybe my performance. And so let's maybe try to manage and address those. So I think that's the biggest thing that we can encourage females to do, because I think we've always just accepted that pain and symptoms are just a part of life. And I think that we should start to think, well, that doesn't always have to be the case. Maybe we can do some things about that. We shouldn't just suffer through it. So that would be the message, is about managing those symptoms, because that may ultimately help you sleep.
I think it's some refreshing comments there from Shona, particularly, I think she's right, where a lot of female athletes have felt that they just have to endure, pain and discomfort, and not only around the menstrual cycle, but, for older athletes around perimenopause and that kind of thing. And I feel that the sands have shifted in recent years. It's like, you know what, you don't have to put up with it. It's okay to say things are not great, and to go and talk to the doctors about kind of managing those symptoms. Again, I found them really refreshing comments, and I hope a lot of female athletes do also.
I love to take on it. It's something that's that conversation about pain tolerance and soldier on and come on, just crack on through it. Like those days hopefully are starting to get behind us, and normalising pain and normalising going to your doctor and talking about symptom control and how you can positively lower your menstrual cycle symptoms. And if it's affecting your sleep, obviously that's going to have a knock-on effect to your performance. If your symptoms are obviously affecting you through your day, then it can affect your performance in the gym, on the training court, in the game. So I think it's something to not shy away from, and to put your hand up and say, I need some help. Those comments from Shona, so that was very refreshing. It was nice to hear.
Now, blending a little bit of travel stuff and also the female athlete, one thing that I think that a lot of people would instinctively do is think about caffeine when they're traveling to try and help keep themselves awake. But we also know that caffeine, as we've discussed on this podcast previously, is terrific for performance, but not great for sleep. There's also been some research out there that says there may be some interaction between caffeine and the oral contraceptive. So again, this is something that I thought was great to kind of bring into the conversation with Shona. And this is what she's got to say on the topic of caffeine and the female athlete.
Yeah, so we've always known that there's this association between caffeine and sleep from a negative perspective. But then we've got this really good data that says that caffeine's good for performance, right? Yeah. So we're kind of in this, a bit of a conundrum, right? So my approach and the way that I talk to athletes about it is, if you're competing and it's an Olympic final, let's just go, you do what you need to do for caffeine, because we want you to race well. If you don't sleep that well, probably not the end of the world, unless you've got to keep backing up races. So performance is usually, for me, going to be the priority. However, what we need to think about is how much caffeine are they at people consuming around training, so just training, because I think that often gets really high amounts and that disrupts sleep. So looking at what time they're finishing their caffeine intake and how much they're having, and just try to say, look, let's just use these high amounts of caffeine for when you really need them. Recognising also that you don't need super high amounts of caffeine to have an improvement in performance. So let's just work with the dietitians. Let's get our dosages just right to maximise performance. Let's be a little careful in training, because we don't know we'd probably suspect that's going to interfere with sleep. And when I'm not just talking about, caffeine from coffee, it's obviously the pre-workouts. And that's where we're probably going to see some issues, is especially in non-athletes who take, you're working, you're tired at the end of the day, you want to do a session at the gym, you'll have a pre-workout. You can pretty much be guaranteed that's going to have a negative influence on your sleep. Now, with the contraception issue here there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that estrogen in particular is associated with a slowing down of caffeine metabolism. So therefore, the effects are going to potentially last longer. So if you're a female athlete on certain types of oral contraceptives that have, a fairly high estrogen contributor to those oral contraceptives, you may have just a stronger response in terms of your ability to clear that caffeine. So one of the things that we do talk about is, especially if you're monitoring sleep and you're female and you're on the oral contraception, what you might want to do is just start to play around with different doses and timing of caffeine to make sure that it doesn't interfere with sleep. So can you have your caffeine a bit earlier in the day? Can you drop your dosage so that you're still getting some benefits? You're not completely destroying your sleep.
Yeah, everyone's different. And I think that we touched on this with Lisa Middleton and talking about energy gels and foods and what can be tolerated during exercise, before exercise. And you've just got to work it out for yourself. And I think the same, and that's I think what Shona's saying here is that practice makes perfect. So when it comes to caffeine, don't just kind of rock up to an event and go, oh my God, it's just time to go crazy. I'm going to take 3 no-dos, and then you just can't sleep all night. I think it's really important for people to understand what their caffeine tolerance is like. It's interesting insight there into the interplay between estrogen and caffeine as well. So the female athletes need to take that on board and adjust accordingly. But yeah, caffeine is great, but you've got to make sure you're taking it at the right time.
Yeah, it's great practical tips. Much like from Kim Herbert Lossier a few weeks ago. Don't turn up on race day in your super fly shoes, ready to rock and roll. Make sure you understand your tolerance to caffeine well and truly before the big event. But I did like her comments about using it for performance and being really careful with your training, because I think a lot of, and obviously it takes a bit of time for you to figure out, how caffeine responds to you. Imagine if you can get that wrong and you have your pre-workouts too late at night and you're trying to juggle kind of on-court training sessions, gym training sessions, it'd take a little bit of planning to make sure you're having caffeine at the right time, because the last thing you want to do is, affect your sleep quality consistently. So yeah, compounded into the next day and the next week if caffeine's all over the place. Great tips and advice from Shona.
All right, well, let's close the loop on this episode and kind of go back to the top and talk about travel and the female athlete together. And I just want to bring in one other paper, which I think is very complementary to what we've discussed with Shona and her research in recent times. And that's a paper by Miles and colleagues published in the Biology of Sport 2022. The title of this paper is What Are the Sleep Characteristics of Elite Female Athletes? A systematic review and meta-analysis. I don't think we can go an episode without getting a meta-analysis kind of in the discussion, Mick, but
no, we have to.
We have to.
It's our duty. It's our duty of care.
It's our duty, yeah. So 38 studies included in this review. Again, I'm not going to go into the hard data of it, but essentially the reason I brought this into the conversation was that it's one of the main things that they discuss in this paper is that situational stresses disrupt sleep more than biology, and particularly with competition and post-competition stress, all the stresses that go with having to perform at your best, particularly when you're on the road, affect your sleep as much, if not more, than travel. So that you've got to remember that it's the collision of both these things, that if you are going overseas or long distances to go and compete or train or perform physically somewhere, that you've got the stress of travel, you've also got the stress of having to perform physically as well. So I think that was a really good complementary point to include here to round it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can probably pick a handful of, well-known high-profile cases over the last, 5, 6, 10 years on elite athletes, probably underperforming or not meeting the expectations of either themselves or the general public. Just think not to say we expect anything out of anyone, but I think there'd be a lot of people who were watching the Winter Games and the quad god ice skating and being unable to perform on the world stage. Obviously, there's lots of different reasons why people underperform, but when that's a perfect example. Like, you got the stress of the competition, you've got the travel stresses and all that goes into it. It's a very complicated network of things that add to your performance. So if everything's not quite in sync and you've got one little link in that chain of things that add to your performance, and if one of them's not quite right, then the whole rest of the chain can get off kilter. And if that's one thing you can control is your sleep, I find that to be critical to then how the rest of you will perform. How you think about your performance the next day, how you handle stress the next day, how you perceive pain. All those things are kind of reliant on your sleep quality and how you're recovering and how you're being rested and repaired after training. So I think that's the thing that we've probably got a little bit of control about when it comes to all these uncontrollable variables. And if you can get greater control over your sleep when you're traveling, this hopefully is giving you some tips on that from this episode. So thanks for taking a deep dive with this one and asking Shona all the hard questions.
It was Shona that did the heavy lifting here. There's her research and her comments. So I just came along for the ride and learned something on the way. So thanks to Shona again for being part of it. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. Big thanks to our sponsors, Premax, high performance skincare for high performance people, and Learn.physio, world-class education for health professionals. Catch you next time.
See you next time.